You may have noticed that Bitcoin breached all-time highs. Actually, at the moment of this recording, Bitcoin is doing that specifically. And I care a lot about you adopting this trend, which is why I give you almost daily information, quite frankly. I'm actually quite excited to go to the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. I'm currently in Amsterdam, and on Sunday I will fly to Las Vegas, and I have a feeling that they want Bitcoin to be at all-time highs at the height of the conference. That would kind of make sense. Today we're going to talk about two topics that matter to me. The first one is understanding why I believe that Bitcoin is going to be the world's reserve in the future. And then the second topic is also very important, and that is how can you, as a spouse to someone who might not care about Bitcoin or crypto in general, but at some point in the future, it may become important for that person to access your wealth. So how can you store that wealth and also make sure that if heaven forbid something happened to you, they can access your crypto? All right, number one, why do I think that Bitcoin is on the path to becoming the world's reserve asset in terms of soaring value? Currently, the country of Japan has a lot of trouble getting people to buy their debt. Now, you might ask, what does that even mean, buying someone's debt? Well, it is a way of lending money to a country, typically known as having a bond, and then, of course, you get your money back. That's the whole concept of borrowing and lending, plus a little bit extra. And that little bit extra is the interest on the loan. So typically, those treasuries in the United States, they're called T-bills or treasury bills. Those treasuries are considered the safest way possible to invest your money, because you're going off of the assumption that a country will repay its debt. That means that every large institution, every nation state, every company, every rich individual who needs to invest part of their money into the safest way to invest is going to buy those treasury bills. That, by the way, is also how banks can afford giving you interest on you just letting your money sit in a checking account. For those of you who get 2, 3, 4% cash back, it is because the bank takes that money and buys those treasury bills, and then they give you a cut. Okay, enough of that. What is currently happening is that Japan has trouble finding takers for their debt. And that is a big problem. It's a very, very big problem. Why is that happening, by the way? It is because people are slowly realizing that there may be a risk of the country never being able to pay back their debt. And if that is the belief that someone has, well, then the interest can be as juicy as you want, but you're not going to invest your money in if you don't believe that you can make it back. So that means that countries have a difficult time refinancing themselves, bonds. That, by the way, is also a risk for the United States. And that leads to either one of two outcomes. The first one is, well, you're going to have to make that interest more appealing, and that's what Japan is trying. But if that doesn't work, then there's only one way out, and that is you as a country have to print more money so that you can buy your own debt, or that you can pay back those high interest loans that are of course denominated in your national currency. In Japan being the yen, in the United States being the US dollar. Now all of that may lead to an extreme bubble that may at some point implode. One of the wisest people when it comes to generational macroeconomic understanding, Ray Dalio, he's talking about that. The fact that when countries have trouble refinancing their debt because they're not really producing enough value, basically they are over leveraged in debt, that can lead to a collapse and to hyperinflation. And whenever that happens, and that can happen very drastically sometimes, whenever that happens, the only way out is to have your money invested in something that people will always need. Typically rare, useful stuff, such as real estate, specifically residential real estate, because you always need to have a roof over your head to sleep. Yes, AI may prevent people from having to go to a workplace, and the whole shift in culture, the whole work from home movement, but you always need a home, a roof over your head. The other aspect is of course something that is rare in form of a digital rareness is Bitcoin. There's also commodities such as gold, silver, platinum, uranium. All of those are also worth investing in. But of course, I believe the cleanest and unproblematic way is Bitcoin. And we are at a moment in time where the train is unstoppable. Do you honestly believe that the world's leaders are now going to walk backwards and undo all of the hard work that was done to create and establish Bitcoin as the world's reserve in terms of storing of value? No, that's not going to happen. Long story short, no matter what the price of Bitcoin is, you really want to hold as much Bitcoin as you possibly can. The price that Bitcoin has today, $111,000, I believe, as we record this video, doesn't matter. The price when we are in the bear market, maybe it goes back down to 70, 60K, doesn't matter. What matters is that you start accumulating as much Bitcoin as humanly possible, especially for your long-term planning. And as you do that, some of you might worry, well, what if something happens to me? I have reached a certain age where I believe that I might have to worry about how to leave this asset safely behind for my heirs. And that's a very valid question to ask, because the key difference between the idea of Bitcoin and what the traditional banking system is doing is self-custody. Self-custody means that you are in possession of your Bitcoin. And once that is set in place, that self-custody, there needs to be safety around it. It can't be too easy to get access to that Bitcoin, right? But at the same time, if something were to happen to you, your loved ones need to know how to access it. So let's break that down. What does that mean? Where do you store your Bitcoin in self-custody, by the way? Well, the safest way is on a cold storage. And I happen to have one of those with me. This is a Ledger wallet. Ledger is just the brand of this specific wallet. I'll actually include a link in the description if you want to get one of your own. But this is a Ledger wallet that is not connected to the internet, and it has what we call a seed phrase that is a unique identifier of this specific device. And on that ledger, we have the information of how much Bitcoin I own. The ledger is of course protected by a password and by a PIN code and so on and so forth. So if something were to happen to me, first of all, you need to know where the ledger is. And second of all, you need to know the password. And then third, you need to know how to operate this thing. And I think I'm going to create a whole separate video about this where I really walk you through how this works. But let me give you, for the time being, a simple analogy, a really simple analogy. You know how you have an email account and you can pull up your emails on your phone, on a laptop, on a computer. When you're traveling, you can log into your account at the hotel and then pull up the emails, right? Well, now imagine the emails are the amount of Bitcoin, the information of how much Bitcoin you have. And this wallet is just one of the many email clients. If you could have an email client on your phone, on the desktop, on a computer while traveling, as long as you have the password and username, you can access those emails, right? So it's the same with those wallets, with the exception that you don't need a username and a password. You need, really all you need is a seed phrase. The seed phrase is the key to all of that. So typically with those wallets, you need the device. That's the first layer of security. Then you need the seed phrase. That's the second layer of security. And you also need to know the PIN code or the password. That's the third layer of security. So as long as you have those 3 or 4 elements, you can connect to the blockchain and you can download the information of how much Bitcoin you actually own. And you could do that if you wanted to from several wallets. You could access the same information, the same seed phrase, which means effectively, if you want someone else to be able to access your wealth, should something happen to you, they need to know how to use this thing. They need to know where it is, number one. They need to know the seed phrase. They need to know the password and the PIN code and all other security information. That is, of course, very, very critical information that must be protected very, very securely. So what I recommend is you write all of that information down on paper and then you put it in a fireproof vault and you store it in 2 different locations, maybe one at your home and the other one at a bank. The other option is if you truly have a very, very high amount of wealth secured in those things, you can leave some of that information with an attorney or a trusted professional that would handle succession in case of that something bad happening. So hopefully this gives you an idea of, first of all, why is it so important to accumulate Bitcoin? And then second, why is it very, very necessary also that you prepare your family and loved ones for the worst case scenario? Now, if you have questions around this, please ask them in the comments. I'll make more content around that, obviously. But for now, thanks for taking the time to educate yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.